Alberto Einstein, nos sentimos muy honrados de contar con la presencia del profesor Eilan Gross, quien dictará esta tarde la conferencia El descubrimiento del bosón de Higgs, conocido como la partícula de Dios. El profesor Gross es un científico asociado de la Organización Europea para la Investigación Nuclear, CERN, en Ginebra, y profesor de física de partículas en el Instituto Weizmann de Israel. La investigación actual del profesor Gross incluye física de bosón de Higgs. Fue el coordinador del instrumento A-toroidal LHC Apparatus Atlas, uno de los 5 detectores de partículas de construcción en el Gran Colisionador de Hadrones LHC, cuando el bosón de Higgs fue descubierto. El profesor Gross ha dictado diversas conferencias sobre partículas de bosón de Higgs, tanto para público en general como para profesionales en física. Y esta tarde tenemos la suerte de tenerlo con nosotros. Sin más preámbulos, escuchemos a continuación al profesor Eilan Gross.
Okay, thank you. The slides are in Spanish. How many of you speak English? Okay. So, for you, I want to say that the slides are in Spanish, but I don't really remember what's written on them. And I cannot understand what's written on them. So not necessarily there will be a match between what I say and what is in the slide, but more or less, okay? So, first of all, thanks to the College Einstein and the University of San Quito for inviting me. It's a big pleasure and I have the time of my life. The title of the colloquium is Soldier of Higgs, and you will understand during the talk why we call it Soldier of Higgs. So on 4th of July 2012, the newspapers were really rambling on because they reported that scientists proved the existence of God particles. Let's put another, Eureka. Eureka means we found it. This is what Archimedes called in a bastion. That's the legend when he discovered the law of Archimedes of floating bodies. History in the making, okay? So the world went crazy. So I want to start from the end, because whenever I tell the story of the discovery of the so-called God particle, I always get these questions that you see here. What is the Higgs boson? What do we need it for? Why is it called the particle of God? What can you do with it? What applications can you do with it? How can you make money out of it? Okay? That's the question I get. So the short answer is that we scientists don't care what you can do with it, okay? But here is the big answer, and I think that this is the message I'm trying, this is the most important message of my talk. The story of the discovery of the Higgs boson is actually the story of what we call basic science. Basic science is curiosity-driven science, science driven by curiosity. Curiosity-driven science can compete only with one thing, which is imagination. And Einstein has already taught us that imagination is more important than knowledge. And curiosity is what actually brings knowledge. If you are not curious, you will not know more than you already know. You will never read the papers, you will never read books, you will never talk and ask questions, so you will remain kind of nobody. So you better be curious and ask questions and get answers, go to school and study. So Einstein's most important, famous formula is E equals mc squared. So you all know this formula, I suppose. And I gave you a new way to look at the formula, which will be that E equals mass times curiosity squared, mind times curiosity squared. It's good that in Spanish it's also M and C. That's why it worked. So I want to tell you a little bit about the difference between applied science and basic science, okay? Applied science will not move you forward. It will make your life better, but it will not move your knowledge, it will not move you forward. For example, if we only had applied science, you would still ride chariots. There would be great chariots, excellent chariots. There would be automatic chariots. And the horses will be very smart, and they will be super horses, and everything do great, but it will still take us an hour to go from here to 100 meters from now. But today, with basic science, we made a huge progress, and now we can make missiles, and we can make shuttles, air shuttles, we can land on the moon, we can maybe land soon on Mars, we can get human beings in space, and that's not thanks to applied science. Applied science will only keep you where you are and makes things better, but it will not make you progress. Another example is actually light. With applied science, we will not have this light. We will still use candles. There'll be very, very good candles. There'll be great candles. Will not drip, and there'll be fantastic and modern candles, but there'll still be candles. But with applied science, you have electricity, you invent the internet. The internet, by the way, was invented due to the search of the Higgs boson. It was invented at CERN in 1990. But I don't have time to go into it, but you should know that whenever you click www. something, it has to do with the discovery of the Higgs boson. It thanks to the Higgs boson that you have the www. Was invented at CERN. So I hope you understand the difference between applied science and basic science that moves you forward. The Royal Astronomer, British Royal Astronomer Martin Rees says actually that my description is not true, because there's only two kinds of science. One is applied science, and one is yet to be applied. Because everything that you do today will show its marks in 30, 40 years from now. Well, maybe he's right. One example is actually the discovery of the electron, but we'll go to it in a second. So curiosity is what gives you knowledge. So the discovery of the electron in 1895, Thomson discovers the electron. And everybody tells him, why do you waste your time on trying to discover something that nobody can see? It's a waste of time. Nobody can see it. Is it important? Who cares about it? Yet Thomson is driven by curiosity. He discovers the electron. And at the dinner to actually celebrate the discovery of the electron, he raises a glass of champagne and he says the famous word, to the useless electron. And you know what happened 30 years, 40 years after that. So I would raise a glass of champagne today and say to the useless Higgs, in answer to all the questions about the Higgs. Now to discover the electron, Thomson used a very cheap apparatus. You can buy it every day for $100, okay? It's this cathode ray tube that he used in the old televisions. I don't know how many of you still have at home these old big televisions that are based on this tube. Because this tube, you shoot electrons which hit the screen, and then the screen is fluorescent. So this is actually the instrument Thomson used in order to discover the electron. It's a very simple one. This could be a one-man's experiment. He could do it all by himself. But to build the accelerator with which we discover the Higgs boson, you need about $6 billion, more or less. Take $1 billion, add $1 billion. But it's about the price. One person cannot do it. Maybe if his name is Bill Gates, maybe. Normally, one person cannot do it. So you need the world to do it. So there are two collaborations searching for the Higgs in Geneva. One is called Atlas, and one is called CMS. I'm a member of Atlas collaboration. And this is a map that shows you which countries are members of Atlas. This is half of the world, as you can see. Ecuador is not yet there. Hopefully there will be one day. But you see, half of the world is part of Atlas. That's because you need to draft a lot of money in order to perform such an experiment. So basic science is in a way big science these days. And how many physicists are involved in the discovery? Atlas alone have 3,000 scientists, I call them 3,000 driven by curiosity scientists. 3,000 scientists, it's not one person. So if a Nobel Prize is given, it should be given to 3,000 physicists in Atlas, plus 3,000 physicists in CMS, that's 6,000 physicists for one discovery of a very, very small particle. So let's go to the discovery of the Higgs boson. So curiosity, what are we made of is a basic question. Another basic question is, why do we exist? Another one would be, how did it all begin? How did it all come to be, the universe? It turns out that the answer to all these basic questions, what Einstein used to call God's big plan, the answers to all these big questions has to do with one common thing, which is mass. Mass is related to the answer to all these questions. It turns out that mass is a very fundamental quantity of nature. If the mass of particles was not what it is, we wouldn't be here. So in order to explain to you what is the Higgs particle, I will show you a few animations. One of them will probably be able to explain to you and give you the intuition to what we are doing. So at first, let me just check. Okay. At first, the universe was created by Weber, empty. No space, no time, no nothing. So the first thing that created space-time. But the space was filled with nothing, nothingness. And then he put particles inside. But the first thing he put in is the Higgs field. But before you pick the Higgs field, let's first think what would have happened to the universe if it was empty without the Higgs field. Then this woman here, that represents a particle, actually represents the photon, the particle of light, would have no resistance to walk in this universe. She could go in the speed of light. Let's see if I can do it, you see. She could go very, very fast. However, the first thing you do is you fill this space-time with the Higgs field. It's like an ocean, like an aquarium, but you fill it with water. And now the particles interact. This field is around you, everywhere that you sit, in your body, everywhere. Now particles interact with this field, and the movement now is affected. So our particle, our photon, becomes massive. It's finding hard to move, you see? While the fish represents another particle that interacts weakly with the field, and therefore it can move faster or slower. What does it do?
Slower.
The fish moves slower? I don't think so. The fish moves faster and the woman moves slower, and the reason is that the fish, this fish represents a particle that interacts weakly with the field, so it can move faster. The particle that interacts stronger with the field will move slower. So in our body there are elementary particles, those that interact less with the Higgs field will move faster. Those that interact strong with the Higgs field acquire a big mass and find it very hard to move. You understand the idea? Do you? Okay. And this thing happened about 14 billion years ago. About 14 billion years ago, the Higgs field was created. So before we move on, let us look a little bit more of what is matter made of. Matter is made of matter particles and force particles. The matter particles are the neutrinos, the electrons, and the quarks that make the proton. And the force particles are like the photon of light actually, like the photon of light, that mediates the electromagnetic force, electric force. And there are other forces like the radioactive force, which is mediated by massive particles like the W and the Z. That's the name, W and Z. So let's look at the simplest atom of them all, the hydrogen atom. It's made of only one proton and electrons around it. This is the hydrogen atom. How big is the hydrogen atom? Do you have an idea? And does it matter how big is the hydrogen atom? Can anybody tell me how big is the hydrogen atom? Do you understand my question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. You just don't understand the answer. Okay. You're made of hydrogen as well, right? For lots of water. You don't care how big the atoms inside you? Did you ever ask yourself this question? Does it matter how big are the atoms inside us? If the atom was the size of you, you wouldn't be here like that, right? You would be much huge, right? You would collapse by your own weight. What would have happened if the atom would have been bigger or smaller? Does it matter? Does the size of the hydrogen atom matters? So it goes like this. Imagine atoms are much, much bigger than what they are. Then the electric force between one atom and another would have been much, much weaker, because the proton in one atom sees the electron of the other atom, but they are very, very far away. So the electric force is much, much weaker. This is what we call chemistry. Then water would have been evaporated in much lower temperature, because no force will hold the atoms together. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Then you would live in a world without water, like a dune world. No water. You wouldn't be able to live here. You need water to live. Moreover, we would have had to live in complete darkness, because once you turn on the light, the photons hit my hair and immediately move electrons out of the air, and I will look like, like this. My body will disintegrate because everything that hits it will immediately move the electrons out, because nothing will keep the electron close to the proton, because the atom is too big and there's no electric force between the proton and the electron. So if the atom would have been bigger, we wouldn't be here. Okay, that's the conclusion. Let's see what would have happened if atoms would have been smaller. If atoms would have been smaller, the electric force would have been so strong that it would compete with what we call the nuclear force. And if that would happen, there's a risk that galaxies wouldn't be formed. So we wouldn't be here. So if atoms would have been bigger or smaller than what they are, we wouldn't be here. So we are lucky to be here and ask the questions, right? Because if you wouldn't be here, I wouldn't stand here and ask you the questions and answer whatever I can. So somehow the atoms have exactly the size that is needed for our existence. Now the question, what determines the size of the atom? The answer to this is the mass of the electron. The proton is 2,000 heavier than the electron. So it stays in place, it doesn't move. But the electron is so light that due to something called the uncertainty principle, it just moves around the proton anywhere that's possible. If the electron would have been much, much heavy, then the atom would have been much, what do you think, smaller or bigger? Well, I can't hear? Smaller, that is true. You got it. When you're heavy, you are localized. You are localized. One can tell where you are. But when you are light, you move around like this. Nobody knows where you are. So electrons would have been heavier, the atoms would have been much smaller, because the electron would have been localized around the proton and you would know where it is. So the hydrogen would have been much, much smaller. Atoms would have been smaller. If the electron would have been much, much lighter than what it is, the atoms would have been much bigger. So it's the mass of the electron, it's the mass of the electron that determines the size of the atoms, and it's the size of the atoms that is responsible for our existence. So it's the mass of the electron that is responsible for our existence. So what gives the electron exactly the mass that is needed for our existence? This is a miracle of all miracles, right? The electron is exactly the mass that enables us to exist. So where does it get the mass from? What do you think? So when I asked this question years ago, I would say, thanks God, the electron has exactly the mass that's needed for our existence. But nowadays we know that the mass of the electron is given by a field called the Higgs field. So this is why in a poetic way we call the Higgs field the God field. Because it gives the mass that enables our existence. Now you can ask who creates the electrons, and that's a different answer. So it was 1964 that physicists were struggling with the questions: what gives mass to particles? In particular, what gives mass to the carriers of the short-range nuclear forces, like the radioactive force? And all the world was looking for the solution. And it turned out, 50 years ago, that the theorists predicted that there is a mechanism called spontaneous asymmetry breaking. This is too difficult to explain even to professional audience that does not know what is particle physics. But it is called spontaneous asymmetry breaking. I will show you a little bit of it in a second, but just a little bit so you get a taste that things are not so simple as they look like. But the outcome of this mechanism, and it was Peter Higgs that first pointed to this, is that there should be a residual field which manifests itself as the Higgs particle, and we should discover it. And that was 50 years ago. The idea, and you will not understand the following two slides, but it gives you an idea what it is. That everywhere you see it, around every particle that you are made of, there is something called a potential. And it has the form, the shape of a Mexican hat, as you can see. Now, when a universe is, and the little man here, that you see on top, represents the universe at each space-time point. Like, think of yourself, each one has a different, the little man represents the universe at the place where you sit. And it exists everywhere. Everywhere where you see it exists. Now, when the universe was very hot, this little man felt so hot that he just dances on top, but he couldn't move because it was so hot and he was jumping. So the universe was very unstable. Then the universe gets cold, and the little man just slips to the bottom because now it feels more safe. This is called spontaneous symmetry breaking. Because before the little man, the universe, falls down to the lowest energy level, you see a perfect circular symmetry, right? From the point of view of the universe. But once the universe finds itself in the lowest energy state, the little man doesn't see a complete circular margin anymore. The symmetry is broken. Now, as you can see here, at each place the universe found himself in a different lowest energetic state, right? It's here, this point is different from this point, etc., etc. So in each point, it's a different place. But that cannot be, because it's got to fall in the same place. The universe cannot divert itself. So actually, this is what really happens. Now you see clearly how the symmetry was broken, and you could not guess in advance where it will fall, because all places around somewhere have the same symmetry. If I ask you where it will fall, you wouldn't know, but you know that it will fall. So it falls in a spontaneous way to some place. And this is the universe as it is today. This spontaneous integrating brings us to a state, this is the Higgs field, and it shows a presence because you clearly see that something has a tendency here. This tendency is the Higgs field, and we interact with it and acquire mass. So the New York Times, a month ago, so in the 5th of May actually, had the whole supplement about the Higgs boson. And I want to show you what they showed because this will help you again to understand better maybe what I say. So it's difficult to visualize the Higgs field, so many people try many metaphors. So what is the Higgs field? Some people describe the Higgs field as some cosmic molasses, which is like a honey filling the universe, and particles are dragged inside the honey, finding how to move and acquire mass. That's like the ocean I showed you before. So that's one way to actually describe the Higgs field. But we use a field of snow. So if you have snow here, and you have a skier with long skis, he doesn't have lots of interaction with the snow, so he can ski faster. So from the point of view of particle physics, he doesn't have a lot of mass. Okay? This woman is doing cross country, okay? She has snowshoes and she's slowed by the snow. So she acquires more or less mass? More mass. So she's more massive because she interacts more with the Higgs field, right? This man has these heavy boots and he is slowed down because he sinks into the snow and it's very hard for it to move. So it gets even more mass. So he described like a very massive particle. However, this bird does not interact at all with the Higgs field. So it can fly and move at the speed of light, so it has actually zero mass. You got it. So let's imagine that the Higgs field is like a field of snow. And let's compare a snowflake into the Higgs boson. So this is the fast skier, so he's like an electron. It acquires some mass, but not a lot because it interacts very weak with the snow. This cross-country man interacts a little bit more stronger with the field and it acquires some mass, so this describes something like the quarks that make up protons and neutrons. This man sinks in the snow and can hardly move. They try even heavier particles, like the carriers of the radioactive interaction, the W and the Z. And this bird, as we said already, actually is a symbol for the photon that not interact at all with the field and can actually move at the speed of light. So for 50 years ago, physicists were wondering how does it all happen, and for 50 years experimentalists were looking for this evidence for the existence of the Higgs field, and evidence for the existence of the Higgs field is the materialization of it in the form of a particle, which is the Higgs boson. So, people ask me, can you explain it to 10 years old, 5 years old? Yes, I can. The whole world is made of very few elementary particles. In this way, I counted about 17 elementary particles. So, a mother buys a 10 years old child a puzzle. It can be even 5 years old. A puzzle because it's only 17 pieces, so it's very hard to, it's very easy to assemble it. She gives him to play with it, and he plays with it. She goes to do her things, and she thinks she will have some quiet. And he tries, and it doesn't work. He tries again, and he gets very upset, and of course, the fault is on the mother. So he goes crazy on her. What did you do? What did you buy for me? It's malfunctions, it doesn't work, it's not good, etc., etc. She looks at it and she tells him, no, you probably didn't assemble it well. She tries, whatever she does, it's always the same picture. One particle is missing. So one particle in the standard model of matter, of electro-weak interactions of the matter, is missing. So she says to her child, no problem, dear child, we'll call the manufacturer and ask him to send us a spare piece and put it in our puzzle. She goes to the box, she looks at the top of the box and she sees the standard model made by God 40 billion years ago. How can you call God? How can you go back 40 billion years ago? You cannot. You cannot. So what do? You have to make the piece yourself. So the piece is the rare piece, which is the Higgs boson. We had everything. We saw the full structure. It was clear that this piece is missing. We just didn't know the mass of this piece. So instead of calling God, which we cannot do, what we did is simulate, trying to create in the lab the same energy density that existed in the universe 14 billion years ago, and try to actually use this density, this material, if you like, to create again the missing piece, which is the Higgs boson. And that we do with accelerators. This is the inside of the accelerator at CERN, Central European Research Nuclear in Geneva, which is a tunnel, which is built within a tunnel of 27 kilometers in circumference. And what you see here are magnets that accelerate the protons. Protons move at the speed of light, collide, produce a lot of energy. From this energy, we excite the Higgs field and try to create the Higgs particle. The probability that in this collision, we excite the Higgs field and create the Higgs particle is 1 per trillion, 1 per million. It's a very small probability. But we scientists never give up. We will try. In the collision point, you put a bionic eye that actually sees the outcome of the collision, the results of the collision. This is the role of the bionic eye. This is called a detector. In this case, it's the Atlas detector. And the Atlas detector is built by the 3,000 physicists that make the Atlas collaboration. What is a detector? Not the simplest, but the most accessible detector that you know of is your own eye. Why do you see me at all? Do you know why you see me? If you ask yourself, why you see? It's because of the light. If we turn off the light, you won't see anything. You see it because light, particles, which are called photons, hit me. My body returns them, and they hit your eye. Your eye is the most accessible detector that you know of. This is a photons detector, your eye. The way that the photon detector works in your eye is that the photons interact with your eye, and it sends electric signals into your brain, which is your computer. The brain works on this data and creates a visualization of me. So when you say, I see you, you don't see me. You create a visualization. All the world, you're a photon detector. Think of yourself as a photon detector. You look at the world and you see images here in your brain. And this is why you are machines. You're no different than machines. You create pictures here. You're a walking video camera. You understand? And you play back it sometimes when you try to remember something, right? So here's a lady trying to look at this frog. So the frog sends signal. Now the eye is a photon detector. It sends the signal, the electric signals into the brain. And the brain wants to create a prince. But it will probably create back a frog, unfortunately. So that means to see. To see is to create an image in your brain. There's nothing else to it. You're a walking photons detector. You are more than that, but from this point of view. So this is Geneva. And 100 meters below ground, in the border between Geneva and France, people built a tunnel, 27 kilometers in circumference, about 5 meters in diameter. In this tunnel, they accelerate protons close to the speed of light. And in the collision point, they create a lot of energy. There's kind of a collision and an explosion. And from this explosion, we hope that if the Higgs exists, once in a million times, it will be created. So in order to see it, to detect it, we put a detector there. But we won't put a human being there because he won't survive it. And we need a much more sophisticated detector than our primitive eye, which can only sense photons in the visible light regime. So we want something much more advanced that can see photons in all the spectrum, that can see electrons, that can see protons, that can see neutrons. So we built a huge bionic eye, a huge detector that can see the traces of the collision. The collision produces signals which are translated into electronic signals, which are translated into signals that sent into the brain, which is the computer. And the computer, just like our brain, creates a visualization of the collision. This is a picture of a Higgs boson. Now, does it mean that we see it? What do you think? Why do you say no? Why is this different than you see me? You see me, I'm an image. If you tell me I'm just an image, then I have to tell you again what I told you. What you see is an image of me here. So here you see an image that's produced by a computer. You see the image of the image, right? So I'm going to show you now a short movie which starts with a simulation of a collision, but once there is a collision, it's not a simulation anymore. It's what our computer sees in the collision. We see what happened in the universe 14 billion years ago. Watch it. Two protons collide. It's from the point of collision, it's no simulation anymore. This is it. This is a little Big Bang. Isn't it fantastic? If you go to Geneva, you take the road from the airport into France, on the way you see a building with a painting of the Atlas detector. This was actually commissioned by an American painter who painted the Atlas detector, and that's how it looks like. Except that the Atlas detector is about 10 times bigger, the things inside. The collision occurs in the middle of the detector, it's made of layers, and at the end you get signals which translate into visuals that are actually processed by the computer and gives us, the physicists, the data which we analyze. Now when the Higgs is created, it immediately dies. It doesn't live long. But what does it mean that the particle dies? Particle, if it ceases to exist, does it have life? It simply becomes into other particles. It actually transforms into other particles. It disintegrates, decays into other particles. That's the meaning, because energy is conserved. Particles do not disappear. So the Higgs boson decays into other particles. And there are many modes to which the Higgs boson can decay to. One of them, the Higgs can decay into 2 photons. And this is how the photons look in our detector. This is one view and this is another view, cross-section view. You see clearly two photons bounce against each other, and this is actually the Higgs boson. When it decays to two photons, this is how we identify it. It can also decay to electrons. Here's the Higgs boson. Decay into what we call heavy electrons, which are called muons. The red lines indicate the tracks of the muons, which are identified by our bionic eye. The green ones are the traces in the muon detectors. These ones, actually, some of the muon detectors were built by Israel, and you will see in a second. But this is a picture of a candidate of a Higgs boson. This is how it looks like. Now, I argue with people that that means to see Higgs boson, because there's no difference between seeing it like that or seeing it with your video camera, which is planted in your eye. So in the next part of my lecture, I would like to explain how 3,000 physicists, driven by curiosity, managed to find such a tiny particles in a coherent way. So I want you to understand that I call all these people soldiers of Higgs because none of them is a general. They are all as important as others because without a little screw, the spaceship will not move. The detector will not work. I don't know how many of you remember, 3 years ago we had a short in the detector and we had a big explosion. Remember that? And we shut the accelerator for a year. So it was just one shot in one soldering that went wrong. So this person who made this soldering did a bad job. So he is very important. Because of him, we lost a year. So each one of the 3,000 soldiers is as important as others. Let's look who they are. So Lou, will zoom on these people because I'm part of this group, okay? So first of all, you can see me here. But you can see many others. So let me show you who is around there. Just random. So this woman is Fabiola Gianotti. She was the spokesperson, the head of the experiment at the time of the discovery of the Higgs. She became very famous in the world. This guy with glasses there is Kevin Eisenhower, who is our physics convener. He actually manages the whole physics of the whole experiment. This guy, at the bottom right, is Alex. He is our statistics coordinator because statistics has a lot to do with what we're doing. This guy is Lauren Levison in Israel. He was responsible for some computers there work. This guy is a student. Now he's a postdoc. His name is Herman Martinez. This guy is Peter Yunisi. He's an American student. This guy is Swagato. He's a postdoc from India, as you can see. So there's lots of them. Fabiola Gianotti was actually chosen by the Time magazine as runner-up number 5, where President Obama was number 1. So she is the most famous physicist woman since Marie Curie, turns out to be. This is very good for us because each one of the soldiers in both experiments felt that it's part of this coronation or whatever, because it's the first time that particle physics made such a noise, okay? Suddenly physics became popular. This is something we never knew about. And actually, even more than that, a Russian oligarch, millionaire by the name of Yuri Milner, decided to give a prize of $3 million to the spokespersons of the experiments who discovered the Higgs from the beginning. So it's 6 people, they got all together 3 million. And you see here all of them. One of them is Peter Yenny, that's Fabiola. And actually, of course, they realized that they cannot take the prize. So they actually made a fund out of the prize for young scientists, because this prize belongs actually to all of the soldiers in the experiment. Just the Israeli point, because this is the ancient college. These are the Israeli soldiers of the Higgs, Tel Aviv University, Technion and Weizmann, which built these muon detection wheels, which make about 1.5% of the experiment. Building a detector is an entrance ticket to do analysis in the experiment. If you don't build anything, you cannot be part of the experiment. You have to belong to a group that contributes by service and building. You cannot have just the cream. You have to make the whole cake. But Israel is 1.5%, other countries make a lot of contributions. Each one of them is as important as the other, because without a screw, the whole experiment can collapse. I am in the business since 25 years. My supervisor, George Mickenberg was a supervisor of my supervisor, Ehud Kornir supervised me, so it's like 3 generations. Each one of us was a Higgs convener at an experiment at a time, and my story is what I'm going to tell you now. Sorry? Yeah. So this is the structure of an experiment. There are 3,000 physicists and a spokesperson. Then you need to build a detector, so the technical coordination. You need to do physics, there's physics coordination. So the physics coordination is many groups. One is called standard model, like a box of puzzle. Another one is looking for exotic particles. Another one is looking for supersymmetric particles, whatever it is. Another is doing what we call top physics. Another is what we call bottom physics. And there's the group which makes 600 people who search for the Higgs boson. Now somebody has to lead each one of the subgroups. Fabiola leads the whole experiments. The physics coordination leads the whole physics. And the Higgs convener is the one that actually leads the search for the Higgs boson. Since 2000, I was a member of the AJAS collaboration, and I really wanted to become the Higgs convener, because you cannot dream of a better job, for me at least, because since 1987, being a student, I'm searching for the Higgs boson. 10 years I was trying to get it. 10 years I kind of tried to lobby myself and ask people to propose me to be elected to be the Higgs convener. It never happened. About a year and a half ago, in October 2010, I decided that maybe it's not meant to be, so I gave up. Giving up meaning that I took all the knowledge that I have from the Higgs search, where I invented a lot of statistics method, and I took them into the search for dark matter, which is also something very important, except that in the dark matter experiment there are 30 physicists, and in others there are 3,000 physicists. So to make an impact between 30 physicists is much easier than 3,000 physicists. So I just decided to leave the field of ion distribution and go to search for dark matter. So I made a lot of impact. You can see me here, and you can see also that these are all the people that signed the paper of the search for the dark matter. My name is somewhere here, but at least you can see it, right? And I was very happy because I made a lot of impact in a very short time. But then after I started lobbying for myself, I was not trying to be the Higgs convener anymore, nothing. I get a telephone from CERN. And in this telephone, the physics coordination at that time tells me, do you want to be the Higgs convener? And that was, as I said, October 2010, right? And there was a problem at that time, because my brother had a pancreatic cancer, and I was torn between getting the job that I dreamt all my life and wanting to stay with my brother in Israel. So I came and told it to my brother, and he told me at that time that I translated it for you so you can read. That was the letter that he sent to me. He said, this is the job you were dreaming of all your life. Don't even think twice, you have to take it. I took it, but he died 1 month after I took the job. Of course, the minute he told me that I can have the job and he supports it and congratulates me for this, I immediately wrote back to physics coordination. At the same day, 27 to April 11, I wrote to them that I will, of course, do it. This is the dream of my life. There's no way I won't do it. And I thought to myself, how come when I let off, when I didn't even try to be a Higgs convener, suddenly I become? And that was a lesson I got for life. That sometimes when you want something very much, just let it go. If it belongs to you, it will come back to you. If it doesn't, you're probably not meant to be. So, in 2012 was a great year for me, because nobody knew. You get the jobs of a Higgs convener for 2 years and then they replace you. My 2 years were great 2 years. They are not finished yet. I still have half a year to go. But on the 4th of July 2012, the Higgs group, which I coordinated, found the Higgs boson. I was very lucky that it happened in my term. The world went crazy, as you can see, giant leap for science from the Economics magazine, finding the Higgs boson. So how do you find the Higgs boson? It's like a very, very small piece. The probability is 1 in a million. How can you find such a thing? This is crazy. It's a challenge. So let me try and explain it to you. Do I still have time? Okay, I will try to move fast. I have to finish, right? No, you said that our bus is at 3:15. Okay, so think of a box of coins. Each collision produces a coin. Now some coins are Higgs bosons. And they have the mass of the Higgs, which is 125 units, whatever it is. But there are many coins with a mass of 125. So you start to count coins. You start to count coins. And you ask yourself, how many coins I have in each mass? At the very 125, I see nothing special. So the probability that I see what I see is even everywhere. Now I continue, I have more collisions. I start to see something around 125. What is the probability that this is something new and not just a coincidence? The probability that the coincidence is like toss a coin 6 times and get head. 1, 2, 3. You can think it can happen. It's very rare, but it can happen. So let's try more collisions, and even more. Suddenly you see a tower around 125. The probability that it's not the Higgs, that it's not something new, it's like tossing a coin 16 times and get the same thing. Of course, would you bet that this coin is a fake, or would you bet that it's nothing special? Of course you will bet that the coin is a fake. Of course you will bet that you see a new particle. And that was November 2011 that we were sent these plots from CERN. I was in Paris in a conference. That shows that the probability that we see something which is not a Higgs boson, that it's not a new particle, is 1 in 1,000. And we went and told it to the world. And nowadays, we have what we call 5 standard deviation. The probability that what we see is not a new particle is 1 in a billion. So, of course, you will bet that you see a new particle, and you will tell the world that you see a new particle. And of course, we went to celebrate. We opened 7 bottles of champagne. But first, there were the seminars. People queued all the night, 1 kilometer of the queue, to go into the seminar hall. They slept over everywhere. And this is Mr. Higgs going to the room. This is Salman Wu, a Higgs hunter, asking Mr. Higgs, telling him, I was looking for you for 20 years. And he tells her, now you have found me. And this is, again, Higgs. This is the room. If my children ask me, where were you? I can show them I was there. And then it was declared, we see the Higgs, we see a new particle. But those people who queued all night, they did not witness the declaration. They were simply falling asleep. You see all of them. It is amazing. Then we celebrated, of course, this is the Higgs group of us celebrating the existence of the Higgs boson. And then the paper came out, and there are 3,000 authors in the paper. And because I have to rush, I will not tell you this thing, but I'll show that there are 3,000 names. So the beginning of the paper is about 10 pages of just names. And if you look very carefully, in one of the pages you see my name. Thanks God it's ABC. So you can find it. But I was a Higgs soldier, but a very fortunate man, because you can imagine why. So I want to finish with actually two things. This is Alex, my statistics convener. And Alex, me, drove to the airport to drop a friend, Marumi. And on the way, 4th of July, Alex says to me, and I was asked by one of the students today, Elam, does the world look different to you today? We looked at each other and it says, well, now we understand the structure of matter, so it must look different. So we both say to each other, the grass is greener. And I want to end with an epilogue with something from William Blake saying that to see a world in a grain of sand, heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Thank you very much. There are 10 minutes before the buses, so you can have two. Well, you asked enough today. Yes, please.
Jake.
Okay, take mine. Take mine. Take mine. Take it.
Usted nos habló de el modelo estándar en sí, y este exige el cumplimiento de la simetría, y la simetría condiciona las leyes de la conservación de la energía, y también condiciona el hecho de que la masa de las partículas sea cero. El doctor Higgs, cuando introdujo el campo de Higgs, que como resultado de la interacción de los protones y que en sus detectores, en el acelerador de hadrones, sí, es que son tantas cosas que me preocupan, por eso es que converso un poquito. Ya. El modelo estándar exige que la masa de las partículas mensajeras, por ejemplo, sea cero. El bosón de Higgs tiene masa. Entonces eso es lo que yo no entiendo, cómo encaja esto en el modelo estándar de las partículas elementales.
So I think the question is that the standard model says that the masses of some of the particles should be zero, but the Higgs particle has mass. So how do you resolve it?
It's the mass of the force carriers. Only the photon has zero mass in the standard model because the range of the electromagnetic interaction is infinite. All other particles have masses. The standard model cannot explain the masses. This is one of the open questions that are still left, and that's why we believe there are other symmetries and we'll find more particles. Thank you. What is the next question? Please. No, let's give the student on the top. Please, very short questions to the point. If you can ask in English, it's better, it will save time. Go ahead. No? Okay.
¿Por qué el colisionador es circular si al no hacer eso las placas magnéticas gastan mucha energía y la velocidad se pierde? ¿Por qué no hicieron un colisionador lineal? Incluso cuando registren las ondas es mejor registrar a ambos lados porque las colisiones que son horizontales no son muy tomadas en cuenta.
The short version is why are the colliders all circular instead of linear?
Why the collider circular? Because in each collision, the probability to produce a Higgs boson in 1 in a million, 1 in a trillion. So if you will have one collision per say a second, we will wait more than a lifetime. So we need to collide many particles. So we actually have 1 billion collisions per second. You don't want to lose the particles. You create a beam of billions of particles, they go, one collide, but the rest continue, and then they come back. Because if you will have just one collision, you will have to create it all over again. So with the circle, you will do it again and again and again. You understand? Yeah, okay, one more. Yeah.
Yeah. The Standard Model only explains the 4% of the mass of the universe. So why do you generalize the creation of the universe? Why do you generalize with a model that only explains the 4% of the mass of the universe, the creation of the universe?
Because we don't understand the dark matter and dark energy yet. But the dark matter, if it's matter, then it could be like higher symmetries with more particles. It's certainly not within the Standard Model. Certainly not within the Standard Model. This is still a mystery of nature. I didn't say that we solve the mysteries of nature. Yes?
How do you know that the particle that you find is the Higgs particle?
Okay, this is what I do for half a year now. What we do is measure the properties of the particle, what we call quantum numbers, and we compare them. So now we know that it's a scalar. I see by your question that you understand a little bit. Now we know that it's a scalar field, speed 0, we know its mass, and we know that its parity is plus. So with all these things, I mean, it could be not a Higgs boson, but it's probably a Higgs boson. Maybe not the Higgs boson, but a Higgs boson.
Can they use the front door instead?
Yeah, use that door, use that door.
Why you call this the particle quad?
I think that I explained half of the lecture this, and just ask your friends.
You told that boson-Higgs decay just in photons and muons. There are another particles that can decay from...
Yeah. It can decay to boson quark, it can decay to muons, to ZZ, and therefore to muons and electrons, to WW. It can decay to photon, it can decay to tau, it can decay to anything that has mass, because it's the Higgs boson that gives particles the mass, so it decays to anything that has mass. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.